What's up, drummers? Damien here. And if you're anything like me, you've probably spent far too many hours as a young player trying to learn all of your favorite artists' songs. I spent hours and hours in a day sometimes just pulling out the favorite albums, trying to learn everything note for note. But when I played them back, when I got on and performed them on the kit, for some reason they just didn't sound the same. They didn't sound as powerful. They didn't flow as well. They didn't feel as good. And it was nothing to do with the complexity of the beat. You know, maybe it was a very, very simple rock beat, but even then, it just didn't seem to have that same drive. What is this? Is this all the studio fixing things up and making them all sound great when really none of us sound that good without it? Well, it clearly isn't, because when you go and watch some drummers live, in fact, if you put 10 drummers in a room and you got them all to play the same very simple rock beat, you get 10 different rock beats, right? They're all playing exactly the same thing, but they're all playing it very different ways. Some sound better than others. So I'm going to show you 3 things that you can do today with your own playing, and this won't require you to learn any patterns, any new ideas or fills or beats or anything like that. Take what you do today and incorporate 3 different concepts to those beats to make them sound stronger and better and groove a lot better than perhaps they are at the moment. So the first one that we're going to look at is really it's a measurement of togetherness of your playing. Now, as a kid, when you go in for your first lessons, one of the most important tools that you bring with you is a metronome. And the reason we practice to a metronome is to learn to keep steady time, sure, but it's also to learn to hit things with dexterity and accuracy. Okay, so when we hit against the click, what we're aiming to do here is to hit everything 100% in time with the click. And some of us don't, and that's a big part of what our practice has to go towards. But what we don't think enough about is how together we are within ourselves, within our own limbs. And I call this concept simultaneity. It's a measure of togetherness or simultaneousness of our playing. So if I was to take a basic rock beat, let's say, just kick and snare and kick and snare, and that we can all play, are we really doing everything as together as we think we are? And does that have an effect on our playing? So I'm going to first of all look at an example where our bass drum is perhaps lagging a little bit behind our hi-hats. And you'll be surprised how many people don't even realize they're doing this. So I'm going to cut to a clip now. Let's have a listen to what that sounds like and see if you can pick it. Okay, so hopefully you can hear there that there's something not quite right with the beat. Maybe this is something that you might be doing in your own playing and not realizing it. So this first concept of simultaneity is all about being aware that things could probably be a little bit more together with your playing than they are now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly flip over into Pro Tools, and I've recorded myself playing a very basic rock beat, and you can see here that I have 3 microphones set up. I've got the kick drum, the snare drum, and the hi-hat. So very, very basic, very simple. And you can see that we start with the bass drum and the hi-hat. Yep, that's fantastic. Then we move to a hi-hat on its own, and then it's snare and hi-hat. So it's the basic makeup of a beat. But everything looks kind of together. When we see a bass drum, we see a hi-hat directly underneath it. But if I was to zoom in now, let's take this note here, and I zoom in on this particular note, you see what's going on here. So there's my hi-hat. My hi-hat starts around about there. But when I'm magnified right in, I can see that indeed my kick drum is not being played 100% together with my hi-hat. It's actually a little bit behind. Or the hi-hats could actually be coming in a little bit too quickly. We can't tell in this example because we don't know where the click or the metronome is actually falling, so we don't know exactly which one is in error here. Might be both. But the point is that they are not together. And depending on how far apart they are, that might be quite noticeable. Now, it's worth pointing out that in a band, if you are playing a certain style of music, you can actually use this concept to your advantage. For example, if you are playing like an 80s rock ballad, it's actually beneficial to pull the beat a little bit behind, or to pull the notes apart just a little bit, to give that feel like it's dragging, or that it's quite heavy and sort of ploddy, because that suits the style of music. It works with the music. And similarly, if you were playing in sort of a more dance-orientated band, you may push a little bit on top of the click, or maybe put some notes just in front of others where they would usually be hitting 100% together, because you want to create that illusion that things are surging forward and they're pushing ahead. But to do it unintentionally is not a good thing. So be aware of your togetherness or your simultaneity, and make sure that if things are not quite together, that you really put some time into focusing on getting those kicks and hi-hats together, getting those snares and hi-hats together. When you come out of a drum fill and you're hitting the crash and the bass drum together, make sure they are indeed 100% together, because it does make a difference, and it's an audible difference. You will actually hear when things are not quite right. And beats can sound a whole lot more powerful just by tweaking that concept of simultaneity. All right, so now let's look at the second concept. And this is something that many people actually do eventually without thinking about it. And this is the concept of accenting on the hi-hats to help the pulse or the groove of the music be even more predominant. Okay, so when I talk about the pulse, what I'm talking about, if you're not familiar with anything to do with music theory, the pulse is generally that point where you would sort of bop along to the music or headbang or whatever it may be, but it's clearly where you can hear the rhythm of the music pushing forward. Okay, now as drummers, we not only play on that beat, but we play notes in between. We subdivide to create groove around that pulse or within that pulse. Okay, so but we have to know where that pulse is, and once we do, we can actually use our hi-hats to push those particular notes a little bit harder than other notes to give an even more emphasized display of what's going on. Okay, so in this basic rock beat, we can be hitting a little bit harder on our hi-hats when we hear a bass drum. We can hit a little bit harder on our hi-hats when we play a snare drum. So let's cut to a clip now of that. So we first of all look at just the beat being played without any accenting, and then we're going to accent on the quarter notes with the hi-hat, and you'll hear how much of a boost it gets in terms of its delivery. Okay, so once again, it's a very simple scenario. We're just accenting with our bass drum and our snare drum just to give that groove a little bit more push. And if you use this together with the simultaneity concept that we just looked at, you should find now that it's made a marked improvement on the way that your beats sound. Point number 3, we're going to look at the concept of rim shots. Now, most of us have hit rim shots either intentionally or accidentally in our time already. But what they really are is it's a technique where you're hitting the snare drum head with your stick, but you're also, with the shank of the stick, you're also catching the rim of the snare drum. Now, this creates almost like a little, I guess you'd call it a mini explosion. And it's a very cool effect, and of course the louder the volume you play, the more effective this can actually be to help you get over the top of the other instruments, because one thing a rim shot does is it really pushes volume out of your snare drum, even if you're not hitting it that hard. And we can use this to our advantage as well, because rim shots have a much more percussive, explosive sound, as I just said. So it can help you sound like you're really pushing that beat when you're not actually physically hitting that hard. Okay, so to play a rim shot, as I said, we play the stick on the snare drum in the same way that we normally would, but we rest the shank of the stick down so that we're going to connect both the rim of the drum and the head of the drum at the same time. And when you get that right, it's unmistakable. And in fact, what's happening here is we're actually activating the shell. We're getting sort of a sonic response from the shell. And this is why we get, when you go to a store, we get snare drums, some of them made from wood and from metal and from bronze and brass and all different materials. And when you start playing rim shots on your snare, you really start to hear how the material of a shell makes a difference to the sound of that drum, because when you rim shot, you activate it, and it gives you a very distinct sound, and that's different for every drum. So let's look at a clip now of firstly playing just a standard hit on our snare drum in the rock beat, and then we're going to change all of those backbeats into rim shots, and you'll hear the difference that it makes. Okay, so hopefully you've found some value in what we've seen. So again, 3 different concepts here. Simultaneity, making sure that everything that needs to be played together is being played 100% together with the limbs of your body. The second concept was this concept of accenting the hi-hats to help push a groove out, to help give us a little bit more pulse and a little bit more groove in our playing. And of course, the third concept was rim shots, where when you feel like putting them in, they can really help drive and push the sound of our beats above the other instruments and really getting it to drive hard. So try those 3 concepts out. Please respond. Let me know how you go with them. Let me know if it has changed the way you play. And it's always a good idea with any of this stuff to record yourself playing it beforehand, put some time into learning it, and then recording the same thing afterwards, just to hear objectively how it's changed your playing. So get onto it. Good luck, and keep on playing.